Welcome to CTech Almanac. Today I want to talk about how to build a mining PC, quote unquote a mining rig, but actually we'll be building a PC. And this is just a cost savings to get a PC case that is relatively cheap, and we'll be using just a right angle aluminum rod here to attach the extra GPUs to. And everything else is standard PC components. So we got the motherboard, and I assume you know how to put together a motherboard, get memory, CPU, and basic SSD, so that's it. Nothing fancy there. And of course, last but not least, we got all the GPUs there. So that's going to be the most expensive part, but since you spend all this money, why spend even more on some fancy mechanical rig that looks like it has to be built a certain way, but really doesn't. So what I'll show you today is just taking a relatively cheap PC case. We'll put the motherboard in there, put the power supply, one of the power supplies in there, and as many GPUs as we can fit in, with good thermals, make sure there's enough ventilation. And then we'll put the rest of the GPUs on this aluminum rod just beside the PC. And that's that, and there you go. So save yourself some money in buying some kind of fancy a mechanical rig to put all the GPUs on. Okay, well let's get started with assembling some of the components. One of the most important components of any PC, but especially a mining PC, is the power supply. This is a 1 kilowatt power supply, and you can get some higher ones. It's not as convenient to find different manufacturers and types, so there's just more selection in the 1 kilowatt, maybe 1.5 kilowatt range. And so what I'm going to do here is use two power supplies. This is going to be the one in the computer case here, and there's another one to power the extra GPUs. But one note about these is that usually the high power ones have this, but you need to have enough PCIe cables and outlets on it. So this one has 5, and so for the purposes of this power supply, 5 is enough, because one I'm going to use one for the CPU, so one's gone, and then the rest will be used for for relatively low power GPUs. So we should be fine there, but that's something to watch out for, because if you don't have enough cabling and you don't have enough PCIe outlets on a power supply, you won't be able to power the GPU. So and then it gets tricky if you try to split cables and things like that. May not get enough power per GPU. So something to think about as a power supply, and that's the other reason I use more than one power supply, because they have plenty of cables everywhere, plenty of cables to use, and so there's no risk of running out of cables and having to buy some special split cables and things like that. So the motherboard is in the case, and I want to pause here for a second and talk about how the GPUs will go in. So we got 6 PCIe slots, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the way I'm thinking about this is that I can put 3 GPUs in the case and 3 GPUs outside the case. And the ones that go outside the case go through these PCI extenders, which are already plugged in here. And all these extenders do is that they have a little PCIe 1.0 PCB that goes in there, and they talk over USB. And then it's just an external card that you plug the GPU into, that extends the PCIe slot, And the reason I need to do that is obviously I cannot put 6 GPUs in the case here, but also power-wise, the power supply I have powering the case just doesn't have enough power to power all 6 GPUs. So all I got to make sure with the power supply is that I'm connecting the power supply in the case to the 3 GPUs inside the case. And then I have this power splitter here, which is all it is that it splits off the control signal, these 2 wires over there, to the other power supply. And that way, when I turn on the PC, it turns on both power supplies at the same time. And then finally, the GPUs that go outside the case will connect to the other power supply along with the PCI extenders. They'll also connect to that power supply. Important to keep those two separated. The power to the power supply, the power to those three GPUs need to be all connected to the same power supply. But other than that, next step, I'm going to start with just one GPU. So before booting the system or doing anything, trying things out, I'll put in one GPU. And then we're going to go through the BIOS setup, and hopefully we'll boot, and we'll make some changes there to make sure that everything's set up for 6 GPUs, and specifically for mining. So turning things off that are not required. Well, after some head scratching of how to fit these GPUs into the case, I finally decided, which is pretty much what everyone probably is already thinking, that just easiest to put everything on the rail here, all 6 GPUs on the rail outside the case, and then the case is nicely can connect to these from nearby through the PCIe extenders. It has to be pretty close, but it will work. And the case is still a good thing to have because it holds the power supply, holds the SSD, the motherboard. There's extra fans in there, so it does actually add some circulation to the area. And I'm going to leave the case open, so all those extra fans in the case is going to actually rotate the air around the GPUs as well. But yeah, so I got all 6 GPUs now. Just in order from left to right here. We have an RTX 3080. We have RTX 1660 or GTX 1660s, 4 of them. It's the super version of it. And then finally we have the RTX 3090, the big guy over here. So that's going to be a fun thing to turn all these guys onto max clocks for memory and see how much the hash rate is going to be. Let me show you how I attach the GPUs to the rail. You can see here that there's a single screw that holds it there. It's an 832 screw, and I'm just using the same technique for all the GPUs. And it has plenty of sturdiness, right? This is a 90-degree rail, so it really holds everything well together. And looking at the cost of this, right? If you just go super bottom dollar to want to build this, you can just get the rail, get the screws, and maybe spend $5 or less, and you got a rig. You don't have to even have the PC case. I like the PC case because I can put everything neatly in there. The SSD, the motherboard, one of the power supplies, wiring is kind of tucked away in there. Plus it has fans, and so it does help with the circulation of the air. But yeah, you can obviously get extra fans for these GPUs. But the trick here is that you space the GPUs out quite well. You're in control of this, right? So you don't have to obey the quote unquote law here of have some certain spacing for the GPUs, but space them out. They're about 6 inches apart the way I have it now. With all the fans on all the GPUs, there's plenty of air circulation here. So that's going to be really, really important to have that spacing of the GPUs. So okay, let's look at the BIOS settings. Now every motherboard and BIOS will look different, so this may not apply to you, but some of the general concepts here are important to set up this PC for mining. So first thing I see here that I notice is this sort of system performance selector here in this screen. So I've gone to the power savings selection. I selected this just to make sure that the motherboard, CPU, and peripherals on the motherboards don't consume power or as much power. We want to save as much power there as possible. We want the GPUs to consume all the power. So we don't want any power losses on the motherboard if you can avoid it. So this might help us a little bit. Usually it isn't a lot, but when you count it all up, it does add up. So I try this first. We'll see how things behave once the OS is installed, but I'll start with this one. Obviously, double check your temperatures and make sure everything's good. If you didn't install the CPU fan correctly, for example, you'll see your temperatures here going up. So just double check that. Everything looks normal, and then we're going to enter the advanced mode here. And in this mode, again, it's going to be different for the different biases, but looking through all the tabs here, I usually ignore this main section. AI tweaker, this is just some CPU overclocking thing, which is, automatic settings are fine. We can come back later here if the CPU ends up using a lot of power. We could come back, but unlikely, right? With Windows installed, usually the CPU consumption is maybe 1%, 2% at most. If you're not running a bunch of background services, so this should automatically save power. With those settings. Now, advanced configuration, I usually go through everything. I go through and check: is there something I need to turn off? Really, what I'm looking for is things to turn off to save power, really. And nothing here on a CPU, and I just basically go through everything that looks like I might need to turn off to save power. SATA, it's mostly disabled. I only have one SSD. That's good. And looking at some of these configurations. The graphics configuration is the internal graphics, not the GPU that you have connected, but the internal graphics of the CPU. So all this stuff is perfectly fine, right? You don't need to tweak it. USB, we want to enable because most of the stuff I'm going to be, using USB for. So we want that. Here's where I disable stuff. So audio controller we don't need, disabled. This via 1394 disabled. I leave the storage controllers on. You never know if it's gonna affect SSD performance or mess with your SSD at all. So just for safety reasons, I kind of leave these on. And then for internet connectivity, I'll use Wi-Fi over USB. So the Ethernet ports are all turned off. And USB again, but it's on the way it was by default, and of course we don't need the serial port. That's going to be turned off as well. So that's just a little bit of power savings. Here, in the APM section, this is important. Restore AC power loss. You want to have it on power on. So whenever there's a power glitch or loss, because this will be a headless PC, you want the power to, you want it to turn on automatically, right? You don't want it to come back and find it off. So, you want to make sure you set that. That's super important. And I don't even know what this network stack is. Disabled sounds good to me. This is just the informational screen. And then on the boot screen, the one thing that I need to check here is wait for F1 if error. I'll have that disabled because eventually, once everything's installed, I'm just going to unplug the keyboard, mouse, and everything, monitor from it. So you don't want this thing sitting there waiting for you to press F1 because the keyboard is missing. So that's super important to have have disabled. Nothing else here. The boot order of devices for this BIOS, it looks like it's automatic. On my SSD, I don't have an OS right now. So when I plug in a USB to boot, boot the installer for Windows, it's just gonna recognize that. So we should be fine there. And then here, some utilities, probably leave them the way they are, and that's it. And you can hit exit and save changes, and yeah, you want to do that. And you should be getting back to a screen where everything boots up, no error messages, no nothing that's unusual. And you see something like this where, since there's no OS on any other storage devices, now it's time to install your OS. So that's about it for the BIOS configuration. Again, these things vary widely. So this one's a pretty simple BIOS config on this motherboard, but yours may have all kinds of advanced options. Again, the key is to turn things off. If you do see some PCIe configuration, make sure you set it to Gen 1 or the lowest speed. Just because we have so many GPUs connected to the motherboard, we don't want one or the other eating up all the bandwidth, right? And for mining, you don't need that much bandwidth anyway. So the PCIe 1.0 X1 is perfectly fine, right? Even lower is fine. So that's a good idea if you have it. This motherboard automatically seems to manage the PCIe speed, so there's no way for me to tweak it. But if you see something like that, then that's something you want to do on your BIOS config. Okay, so here's what everything looks like with power hooked together and two power supplies also hooked together. And let's just turn it on. And that's the sound you want to be hearing. Fans spinning up and no smoke and no beeps or nothing else. Now, you may notice that some GPUs may not have this fan spinning, and that's okay because there's no load on them right now. So their thermal control algorithms, they're gonna have it fan off if it's idle. Same thing with the power supply. The fan won't be spinning if it doesn't need to, so don't be alarmed if something doesn't look like it has power. One way to check though is, there's some blue lights down there, and those lights indicate the power to the PCIe extender or the riser. And if the lights are on there, then you know that it's at least you're getting power there. So the next step now is going to be installing the software. I already went through the BIOS settings, and so really it's just installing the OS and just connecting these cards one at a time to the motherboard and getting the drivers installed, and then rinse and repeat until all 6 of them are installed. And as far as the final location of this thing, right now I have it on a table, but likely it's going to go just on a metal rack on the floor, just the way it is. No attachments. There's no need to attach anything. The only thing I might put down is a little bit of pads on the bottom of these PCIe cards, just so that it has enough mechanical pressure so they don't pop out of the slot. But that's about it. Nothing else. The power supply can stay the way it is. Some people, tie it down and everything else. No need. And the nice thing about this setup is that when you're done with it, you can always have the case and you can use it for whatever purpose. So that's why I kind of like to use the case. And when I'm done with this rig, or the GPU's burn out or whatever reason, or I need another PC for whatever reason, I have a case and the motherboard and everything else is in it. So it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind when building these mining rigs. You're not gonna last forever. So if you build a big mechanical rig that it's only a single purpose machine, you won't be able to use it for something else in the future. So once I'm done mining, or once the GPUs kind of maybe smoke out, or who knows what happens, then I'll use the case for other purposes. Well, hope you enjoyed this video of putting together a mining rig, and hope you learned something from it. Clearly there's many different ways of putting together these mining rigs, and I chose a path of taking a PC chassis, a PC case, and building a really simple GPU rail next to it. And obviously you can buy more expensive rigs and mechanical enclosures, but in my mind, this is somewhere between of, hey, just throwing everything down the floor, power supply, motherboard, GPUs, and maybe some zip ties, and then getting a full-on sort of dedicated rig. And I think the cost of this build makes sense, as in, you're probably looking at maybe $50 to $100, and that's mostly the case itself. And it's a good investment because, one day you may not, may use the case for some other purpose, and it's a good thing to have, right? It's a good thing I like putting, the motherboard, the CPU, the SSD, and at least, a single power supply into a case, just so I have a sort of half-built or semi-built system there if I need it, right? And I can always swap those in and out if something were to go bad. And so, I kind of like this configuration of, not going full on sort of very, very dedicated mining rig, but having this case available and usage for later if I need it. Plus, of course, it's less expensive, right? Mining, sort of the better mechanical mining rigs today cost hundreds of dollars, and so cheap case, it's maybe $50. And if you have one lying around, then you can just use that. So, the whole thing here probably costs you, about $50, depending on how fancy you go with the case. But it's something that, where you're not investing another couple $100 for the rig itself, where when you invested potentially thousands for the GPU. So it's just a way to be, more economical a little bit. Keep in mind that mining is a risky business, and so you may or may not make your money back. So, spend it carefully. Well, anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and there's more to come. I'll probably have some more mining related videos, and of course some other electronics and computer projects as well. So stay tuned and see you next time.